Part 2. Arguments against atheism. The problem of evil. You might have not noticed the fallacies last time, but your brain did.
In this episode, we take a look at the very popular atheist argument called the argument from evil.
Wait a minute, where's the bagels? Where's the yelling monkeys and screaming people? Where's all the memes? How can I possibly understand this video without all the memes? That's alright, Jimbob. I got you, buddy. I got all the memes that you could possibly want, and then some. Plus, you used a white background. Oh, yeah, you're going to regret that.
Which is often claimed to be a defeater to God's very existence. Welcome to
hell, motherfucker!
I don't want to straw man it, so let's get it in precise form.
It's only okay to straw man construct the materialism worldview, but don't do it with this. Oh, that would be bad.
The argument from evil goes as follows. Premise 1, God is omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipotent. Premise 2, an all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful God wouldn't permit suffering in the world. Premise 3, there is suffering in the world. Conclusion, God knows suffering will occur, so he either can't stop suffering, so he's not omnipotent, or he refuses to, so he's not omnibenevolent. Alrighty, did you see any obvious problems?
No.
Premise 2 states an all-knowing, all-loving, and all-good God wouldn't permit suffering in the world. Well, why not?
Checkmate.
What's the contradiction? It seems this very low-level argument from personal incredulity has no basis. From a Christian view, long-suffering is actually a virtue. It is through suffering and sacrifice that we participate in the good. The overcoming of suffering is thematic in the Christian view and praxis.
He's an asshole.
This premise also makes an assumption that suffering is evil.
This is fine.
My question to the atheist is, what makes suffering evil?
That depends on what you mean by evil.
Is having an infected tooth evil? Is a hurricane evil?
No, a hurricane is just an effect of physics, which is neither true nor false, so it can't be evil or not evil. Nothing can be anything anymore. Oh wait, what's that law of non-contradiction? No, let's ignore that. Precept, precept, precept. Oh, sorry, that was the other video. Never mind, that doesn't apply to this video. I'll edit this part out later.
What about a lion eating a baby zebra? Is that evil?
Oh man. Oh God. Oh man. Oh God. Oh man. Oh God. Oh man. Oh God. Oh man. Oh God.
These are all examples of things at most we find unpleasant. If I went to a restaurant and found the chicken special to be unpleasant, would it make sense to leave a review that stated, "Don't get the chicken. It was immoral"?
Stop it. Get some help.
No, that's silly. Preferences are preferences, not ethical stances.
You are making a mistake. My logic is undeniable.
Now, a very similar position on morality was introduced and made popular by atheist Sam Harris in his book, The Moral Landscape. Sam's position was this. Morality is based on the maximization of sentient well-being. And I think we could all agree that suffering is bad. Well, no, Sam, we don't all agree. For one, you have to define suffering, as does the atheist who is using the argument from evil.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong.
Perhaps the atheist will say, I think that it's fairly obvious that pain is the defining feature of what we call suffering. Well, that's not obvious.
I've been listening to that horse shit of yours for months. And you can take that crap and blow it out your ass. And for good measure, sit on this.
What's obvious is that we find pain unpleasant. We also find that human beings have the capacity to overcome pain. Keep in mind, there are people who are born without the ability to feel pain, and yet they arguably suffer more than those who can feel pain.
Wait a minute, you're gonna have to define the word pain. What do you mean by pain? I don't know. You and all the other Christians making this argument are gonna have to define that word. And then, after you define that word, you're gonna have to justify how you possibly know that that's the correct definition of that word. And of course you can't justify it using a materialistic worldview. You're gonna have to appeal to the supernatural, which means I'm actually right. I don't know how to define words. That's so convenient. Whenever he wants you to have the burden of proof, you have to define the words. But whenever it's his argument, he doesn't have to define any words. It's amazing how that works. I don't know what suffering is. Oh, you define suffering? Well, what do you mean by that thing? I don't know. It's not obvious that pain is bad. Yeah, we don't like pain. That's obvious. It's okay when I appeal to my own personal ideas and my own personal incredulity about what things are and how things work, but it's not okay when you do it. See, that was me doing silly voices. You know, remember last time I said that you should do that? And then like you were complaining because earlier in that video I said like that you shouldn't portray the atheist in a bad way, and you're like, well, but yeah, you're contradicting yourself later. Yeah, that was the point. It was both of those things conjoined are comedy. They weren't meant to be responded to. Then again, the whole video wasn't really meant to be responded to. Well, I guess it was meant to be responded to. And you fell for the trap, which makes it okay. Yes, clickbait titles are not lying. It's just slightly deceptive. It's okay. Jesus forgives me. Wait, what are we talking about again? Morals and ethics? No. We're just waffling on, pretending to not understand the argument so we can pretend to defeat it. Because that's all we've got is pretend and faith. We don't have facts or logic. We don't need those. We've got the magical man in the sky that makes everything make sense if we pretend hard enough. Are any of these objections to anything he says? No. None of the things I'm saying, none of the memes so far has been any objection to what he says. I think that what he says is blatantly stupid enough on its own to be obviously dumb that anyone can object to it without any thought at all. I'm giving zero effort to this video, and that's how much it deserves. But I have nothing bad to say about Jimbob personally. He's a very nice guy, I'm sure. It's just that he has to do what he's doing to keep the fan base that he has. Of course, he could have gone for a different fan base. Maybe his fan base molded him into the person that he's become. It's hard to know. Impossible, perhaps. Maybe only his therapist knows, if he has one. And if he doesn't have one, he should probably get one. I'm just saying, it's not a bad thing to have. We should all have a therapist. I have a therapist. What's wrong with having a therapist? Nothing's wrong with having a therapist. Anyways, pain is bad. That's fine. He understands that. But also, pain can be good. So which is it? We don't like pain, but sometimes it's bad. But sometimes it's good. Well, what do we mean by good and bad? Well,
Suppose we could redefine it and say that emotional and mental anguish would be the deciding factor in what is suffering. Isn't emotional and mental hardship an essential feature of growth?
Ah, yes, pain and suffering. It helps you to mature as a person, unless it kills you and then you're dead. But it helps you, though. So, if you were born with a lot of defects, well, that's good. You get to mature even more. Sure, maybe it makes it really, really difficult to live a life, but hey, you're a stronger person for having endured all that hardship. Well, and then if that's the case, we should maximize pain and suffering, right? So, we should, break your legs into little bits and pieces so you can't use them anymore. Doing so will inflict a lot of pain and suffering on you. And then once you can't use them anymore, having to be in a wheelchair will be more suffering for you. But that's all good for you, because then you'll have survived that hardship. Sure, you won't like it, but it's all for the betterment of you as a person. Oh, maybe it will cause PTSD, but that too is good in the long run. Somehow something makes no fucking sense and is incoherent in every single possible way that it could be, and actually justifies suffering on cosmic levels that I can't believe is a thing that any human would do. But it's fine. Oh, sure, God could make it in some way that wouldn't have it be that maturity requires pain and suffering. Not that I think that you need that to be mature, but whatever. But no, God can't do that, because why can't God do that? Oh, because God is a nitwit. That's why.
Even from an evolutionary perspective, the cycles the human body endures are sometimes painful, but they're biological processes. Are they evil? There is a larger problem for this view that was best articulated by William Lane Craig in his debate against Harris several years ago. If well-being is the basis for moral good, is it possible to obtain the peaks of well-being by causing harm?
And this harkens back very nicely to when I yelled at William Lane Craig for being evil because he defends genocide. After that video, I then showed you what it's like to be God in Minecraft, allowing the people to have free will and destroy themselves. A benevolent and loving being would allow for this to happen because reasons. It all makes sense if you stop thinking.
Well, yes, it's not only logically possible, but history demonstrates that groups of people can and have maximized their well-being by causing suffering to others.
Maximizing the well-being of one person by causing pain and suffering to others is bad. The most good for the most amount and the least harm to the least amount. That is to say, try not to harm anybody at any level if possible. Ultimately, we're humans and we're limited, so we're not going to be able to know for sure what would do that. But we got to strive to do that. Meanwhile, God's sitting up there with all the power at its disposal, and it does absolutely diddly squat, because God's evil, and also a nitwit.
When the atheist says pain and suffering is bad, they are actually saying most people don't prefer to feel pain or suffering.
Every word of what you just said was wrong.
Most people don't prefer the taste of licorice either.
Licorice.
If the atheist is claiming that we ought to pursue our preferences, then I'm not sure what was wrong with Jeffrey Dahmer eating.
Wow. There is no God of mercy, Father.
Yes. Pretend to not understand what makes something that is vile and reprehensible vile and reprehensible. Well done. Congratulations. You are the best apologist of all time. That's right. You get the Golden Non-Lobster Award. You get all the awards that you don't want to get. You get nothing as your reward, actually, in actuality, but I'm saying you get the reward that you wouldn't want. A big pile of poo for you to eat. And you didn't even try to do my challenge and eat a plate of wasabi to prove that free will exists. What's up with that? Anyways. Yeah, so you don't know why it would be bad that the guy ate the brain. I mean, after all, as the guy killed the other dude, that pain and suffering, for as long as that person was alive, was increasing that person's maturity and growth as a person. And then, then when Jeffrey Dahmer ate the brain, that was fine because it was giving pleasure to Jeffrey Dahmer, who wasn't suffering when doing that, and then, like, because nothing is true or false unless there's a God, you can't say that it's wrong. And also, like, I don't know what words mean, and you're going to have to define them, and then I'm going to pretend like I don't understand that, so even when you do explain it and justify it, I can just then shift again the burden back to you and say, but what makes it wrong? It's just a preference. It's not like you're saying it's really wrong for real. It's only really wrong for real when God says to do it or not do it. That's what makes things really wrong for real. When God tells you to eat somebody's brain, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. However, if God tells you to not eat somebody's brain, then you definitely shouldn't do it. But if you do eat somebody's brain, it's okay, because Jesus will forgive you as long as you believe in him in a certain magical way and say the right things and make the right prayers towards Jesus and perform the right rituals like baptism maybe, or speaking in tongues possibly. Maybe you need to be a Catholic or a Protestant or one of the versions. I don't know. He never really says which version of God he believes in, but it doesn't matter. You're forgiven for doing that awful, terrible thing, which actually isn't really terrible because he's going to pretend like he doesn't know what makes it terrible. Apologetics in action.
He merely preferred it to Ben and Jerry's. Now, for the sake of the argument, what if we grant the atheist that evil exists in the world? If evil exists, this necessitates an absolute standard for good. The moment the atheist says evil does in fact exist, beyond our opinions or our preferences, then they are also saying an absolute standard of good exists. So, what is this good standard? We've already established that it's not maximum well-being, because the maximum well-being can be attained through causing suffering to others. In conclusion, the problem of evil, or the argument from evil, quite easily reduces to a Reddit-level slogan. If God real, why bad thing happen? If God real, why not I get into art school? If God real, why come I need oxygen to live? If God real, why come I'm not God? Out of the many atheist arguments against God, I think the argument from evil is one of the most worthy of the trash bin. There is no problem of evil from the atheist perspective. There is only a problem of things you don't prefer.
I know, you want me to point out the fallacies that he did. Well, appeal to ignorance, appeal to personal incredulity, burden switching, straw man, God of the gaps, and others. But he also did this interesting thing where he pretended to not know what a word meant and ask us for the definition. But then he proceeds to use lots of words without giving their definition. It's a weird game to play. What do you mean by that word? What do you mean by what do you mean? And he even puts in Jordan Peterson to, like, do that whole bit. Like, well, it depends what you mean by that. Like, yeah, it does. But I think that we mean what most of us mean when we say that word, which is why we have dictionaries that kind of say this is the general consensus of people when they use that word. And even when it is defined, in the case of Sam Harris, he goes on to say, here's what he explains, and then mocks it anyways, and says that's not good enough of an explanation. It's insufficient, because it didn't include God, or it didn't cover every single base that you wanted it to cover. Maybe there was more that Harris said, and you just ignored. I don't know. I think it's relatively simple to work out what the problem of evil actually is, if you don't pretend to not understand words. You have a being like us, we are beings, that has a trait that we understand, love. I understand what it means to love somebody. I understand what it is to be loved by somebody. And when I have love for somebody, I do not want to inflict suffering on that person. In fact, I want to protect that person from suffering. And I will do whatever I can to do so. That's why we usually say things like, I will make you happy. Even if that's an unattainable goal, we say it because we want it. We want the best for that person. We want them to have pleasure, happiness, joy, safety, etc. And the world is an unsafe, dangerous place, and we know it. But we care about them. Now, obviously, we have to allow their freedom, knowing that the world is dangerous, but we're going to be there to protect them in any way that we can. In fact, you advocate for guns for personal safety, so clearly you care about safety, which negates the whole pain and suffering thing. If you don't have a way to protect yourself and your family or loved ones, and the bad guys come in and do whatever they're going to do, well, good, because you actually grow as a person as a result of whatever terror they inflicted upon you. So you can't negate any suffering and justify it without then saying that suffering is actually somehow bad. What if God wanted those robbers to come and rob you and torture or kill you or whatever they did to you? Well, then that was God's plan. How dare you stop God's plan with a firearm? Oops. Also, the whole thing in the Bible says, live by the sword, die by the sword, so you have a gun, so I guess you might die by a gun. Just saying, But at any rate, look. We know what love is. And we know that we, as loving beings, want to negate suffering as much as we can because we know we don't like that. And we assume, and rightfully so, that most people, perhaps all people, don't like to suffer, or at least don't like to suffer all the time. So we're going to protect them from that as much as we can. We're going to negate that. Then you posit a thing that's loving, that is all powerful. It can do anything at all. In fact, it set up the universe to be the way it is. And then you go, well, how can I excuse this being that supposedly loves us and has the ability to negate suffering like we would from allowing the suffering that we have? And then you have to do all sorts of mental gymnastics to do so. You have to pretend to not know what words are. You have to pretend to not understand suffering. You have to pretend this, pretend that. Shift burdens, switch around words, play games, whatever you got to do to, in your mind at any rate, justify that a loving being that has all the ability that there is to have would allow for a state where people will find things to be rather unpleasant. Whether it's a preference or not makes no difference. Whether it's free will or not makes no difference. God set up the system to allow for the stuff that we don't like. And but it does it so that we can grow. We don't always grow from it. And of course, then you have the ultimate of problem in that your whole shtick doesn't explain what the point is of a atheist who doesn't believe in God, who will encounter even more pain and suffering after they die because they dared not believe in the right God in the right way. What was the point of their pain and suffering? Well, they still grew as a person. Yeah, but what was the cosmic point? Well, God has to be just, and that person didn't want to hang out with God. That person didn't even know God existed. How could they make an informed decision? Well, we have all these bad arguments that are supposed to convince you that God exists out there. Surely one of those would have convinced you. No. God didn't do the thing that I needed it to do. And God knows what that is. And I've said it. I've said it plenty of times. Oh, what is it? Empirical evidence, repeatable test, valid and sound argument. Oh, you're asking for repeatable test and empirical evidence? Those are scientific things. Those are material things. Yeah, God didn't have a problem doing that. In your Bible, produced plenty of effects that were signs of God. Well, but those people didn't know that they didn't recognize them. They didn't understand it. Well, that's how the book is written. Those people were stupid. The disciples are written as morons. It's not Jesus doing magic tricks left and right and still didn't get it. They're dumb. I'm not that dumb. I was like, hey, that's pretty impressive. Now, I'm going to put Jesus in a lab and have him under controlled conditions to make sure it's not a trick, make sure that it's legitimately happening. But once my curiosity is resolved, then I will be convinced. But that's a demonstration that is also demonstrable. Yes, I put those things together. They're better together than apart. At any rate, you could make fun of me or any other atheist. You can do whatever you want. And you do. And you get views, you get your money, and you do your thing. Meanwhile, the rest of us have to contend with the real world where pain is really real. And pain is because of evolution. When you bump your toe, your brain says, hey, that hurt, to alert you to something that you need to attend to. However, it backfires because sometimes our body doesn't know when to shut off, doesn't know how to shut off pain. Doesn't know when to stop alerting you that there's something wrong. And so you have to get medication and surgery and other things to negate it. Because we have figured out how to negate the whole thing that God wants us to suffer through for our benefit somehow. Maybe we don't actually think that pain and suffering is good in the end. Maybe we recognize that if we could make a world without pain and suffering, that we would, if only we had the power to. Supposedly your God has that power, but chose not to. My conclusion is God is evil or a nitwit. I prefer the latter. If God's a nitwit, that explains everything rather neatly. It's just dumb. It's just a dumb being that didn't know what it was doing. It's a moronic nitwit who doesn't understand what good and bad are, what serves humanity well or not, and it set up a faulty-ass system that is incoherent and broken because it's just stupid. Of course, why would you worship that? Well, because it wants your worship, because it's a needy, narcissistic, egotistical asshole. That's why. But that's okay, it could still exist, but then the things that you're saying about God would be wrong. Well, we can't possibly be wrong about God, because then what? Then we have to confront reality as it really is, and not make up stories and defend inane ideas of why God, who supposedly loves us, allows suffering to continue. God doesn't love us, and or doesn't have the ability to do anything for us, or both, or God doesn't exist. And out of all those possibilities, the last one seems the most likely. Why? Because every single argument for God that I have ever encountered thus far has had one or more logical fallacies. And every attempt to negate the arguments against God has suffered with one or more logical fallacies, as you did in this video. Thanks for making my point. I'm still a skeptic, and I'll remain so until I have the same amount of evidence for God as I do for everything else. Well, technically I'd still be a skeptic, but I wouldn't be skeptical about that thing. You know, I mean, look, I mean, there's levels of skepticism, and there's ways to be skeptical about things, and actually what it means is the thing. Bagel. It's never gonna be as cool as fucking frog!